When his wife walked out of their small suburban home to marry his best friend, everyone thought Andrew Carter's story had ended in humiliation. They laughed when he sold his car, when his business shut down, when he moved into a one-bedroom apartment. To them, he was the man who went bankrupt after losing everything, including the woman he once called his forever. But beneath that quiet defeat was a man hiding a fortune so vast it could buy the city that mocked him. He watched them, his ex-wife, her new husband, and their circle of traitors, celebrate their betrayal with champagne and stolen smiles, never suspecting that the man they discarded would soon control every breath of their comfort. But it all changed the day his secretary, Emma Reed, found an old letter in his desk, one that exposed secrets buried deeper than love, deeper than money, and darker than revenge itself. Why did Andrew keep that letter hidden for years? What truth inside it turned his silence into strategy? And what did he do weeks later that shocked even the woman who had always believed she knew him best? He went bankrupt after his wife left him to marry his best friend. But what no one knew was that the man they all pitied wasn't broke at all. Andrew Carter, once the quiet backbone of their small-town success, watched in silence as his wife Vanessa traded vows with his best friend, Jason Miller, the same man who toasted his wedding 10 years ago. To everyone else, Andrew was finished, a bankrupt husband abandoned for someone richer, younger, and stronger. But behind the locked doors of his modest office, the truth waited. Buried inside an old letter his loyal secretary, Emma Reed, would one day discover. That letter held the secret of who Andrew really was and why his fall was only the beginning of something far greater. But what could a single piece of paper reveal that made even the woman who stood by him tremble? What truth did Andrew hide that turned his silence into strategy? And what did he do weeks later that shocked the very people who once laughed at his downfall? Rain had always sounded different since the night she left. Once it was music against the roof of their modest home, a sound that wrapped their laughter in something safe. Now it was just noise, pounding against silence, too thick to breathe. Andrew Carter sat in his dimly lit office, the blinds half closed, staring at the wedding invitation he'd received 2 days earlier. Mr. and Mrs. Mason Whitaker cordially invite you. The name Mason Whitaker stabbed deeper than the words themselves. Mason, his best friend since college, the man who stood beside him at his wedding, the godfather of his son. Andrew's hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but restraint. He had watched betrayal before. It came in whispers, in laughter that stopped when he entered the room, in excuses that sounded rehearsed. But this time, betrayal had a date, a time, and an RSVP. He folded the invitation neatly, placed it back into the envelope, and leaned back in his chair. His reflection on the office window looked nothing like the man the world thought he was. They saw failure, a bankrupt businessman with debts choking his name. But beneath the facade was something darker, sharper. Andrew Carter wasn't broke. He never was. He built his empire under different names, layers of shell companies, trusts, and anonymous holdings that controlled half of Stonebridge City's skyline. His failure was a performance, one crafted with precision to test the loyalty of the people closest to him, and every single one of them failed. When Julia, his wife of 7 years, met Mason for business lunches, Andrew said nothing. When she started dressing differently, answering calls outside, deleting messages, he simply smiled. He even encouraged her trip to the Bahamas for space. She returned with a tan and a new perfume. Something expensive, something she said a friend recommended. The scent never left her clothes after that. But tonight, as lightning streaked the sky beyond his window, Andrew wasn't thinking about perfume or lies. He was thinking about the letter. An old, sealed envelope tucked inside his desk, untouched for years. It wasn't just paper. It was leverage, a secret that could turn everything upside down. The door creaked open. Emma Reed stepped in quietly, her brown hair damp from the rain, her blue eyes scanning his face with a mix of worry and loyalty. She'd worked for him for 6 years, through every rise and fall, through every rumor of bankruptcy and scandal. She never asked for explanations. She simply stayed. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "you should go home. It's almost midnight." He didn't move. "Home doesn't feel like home anymore, Emma." She hesitated, then walked closer, Her voice was barely above a whisper. I heard about her wedding. Andrew's jaw tightened. Everyone has. Emma nodded, her fingers brushing against the edge of his desk. Her eyes landed on the old mahogany drawer, the one he never opened. You've been staring at that drawer for hours. He followed her gaze. There's something inside that changes everything. Then why not open it? Because once I do, there's no going back. The clock ticked behind them, marking the heavy pause between truth and revenge. Outside, thunder rumbled again, and for the first time in months, Andrew opened the drawer. Inside lay the yellowed envelope, its edges frayed, the handwriting faint but familiar. To my son, Andrew. Read this only when you've lost everything. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a man of principle who built and lost fortunes with the same calm resolve. His father had always told him, money doesn't test love, son. Loss does. That lesson had become his blueprint for this cruel experiment. He held the letter for a long moment before setting it down on the desk. Emma reached out instinctively, picking it up. Her thumb brushed the seal, and curiosity overtook hesitation. Do you want me to read it? She asked. He looked at her, the one person who hadn't betrayed him, and nodded. Read it. As the seal broke, the scent of aged paper filled the room. Emma unfolded the letter carefully. The ink had faded, but the words still carried weight. If you ever find yourself surrounded by those who love your wealth more than your worth, strip yourself of everything. Let them leave. Let them betray. Because only through loss will you see who remains when nothing else stands. And when you do, rebuild, not to punish, but to remind. But if they dare mock your fall, son, let them see how far you can rise. Emma's breath caught as she finished. Your father, he knew this would happen? Andrew's lips curved faintly. He always knew human nature better than business. He stood, buttoning his coat, his posture straightening with purpose. It's time to rebuild. Emma frowned. Rebuild what? He turned toward the window, watching rain streak across the glass like tears that refused to fall. Reputation, power, and a lesson. The storm outside seemed to answer, wind howling through the city as if in agreement. He slipped the letter into his jacket pocket, his reflection sharp and unrecognizable now. No longer the broken man the world saw, but the calculating force he had once hidden. Emma, he said finally, his voice cold but calm, call the board, every single one of them. We're taking back what's ours. She hesitated. You mean you're coming back? He met her gaze, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. No, Emma, I'm not coming back. I'm taking over. Outside, the rain stopped as if obeying him. Somewhere across town in a lavish penthouse where Julia and Mason celebrated their engagement, champagne glasses clinked under the glittering chandelier. They had no idea the man they'd discarded had just decided their fate. Andrew sat in his car outside the towering glass headquarters of Whitaker & Cole Financial Group, the rain-slicked streets reflecting the building's golden lights like a kingdom built on arrogance. It was the morning of Mason and Vanessa's first press conference together, an event the city's business media had been buzzing about for weeks. The new power couple, the headline said, a merger of love and legacy. But Andrew knew better. He had built part of that legacy with his bare hands before they stole it. He knew the cracks beneath the glass, and now it was time to widen them until everything came crashing down. He adjusted his tie, the soft hum of his car's engine steady beneath the rumble of thunder in the distance. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, composed, the faintest smile curling his lips. Emma Reed sat in the passenger seat beside him, a tablet on her lap, her expression torn between awe and apprehension. You're sure you want to go in there? She asked quietly. Andrew glanced toward the entrance, where photographers and journalists swarmed like bees around honey. They invited the world, he said calmly. They just didn't realize they invited me too. He stepped out, the drizzle glinting off his black suit, and walked toward the entrance with the poise of a man who had nothing left to lose, which ironically made him unstoppable. Inside the atrium, marble floors gleamed, and a massive banner hung from the ceiling. Whitaker & Cole, building futures together. The irony was exquisite. As he entered, heads turned. People recognized him. Some whispered, others avoided his eyes. The bankrupt husband was walking through the empire of his betrayers like a ghost that refused to stay dead. Mason stood near the podium, tall, handsome, perfectly groomed in his navy suit, the practiced smile of a man who thought he had wanted everything. Beside him stood Vanessa, radiant in a white sheath dress, diamonds catching every light. She spotted Andrew first. Her confident smile faltered. Andrew didn't stop walking. He moved through the crowd with the quiet authority of a man everyone once underestimated. Mason's expression stiffened. "Andrew, what are you doing here?" Andrew's tone was soft, almost casual. "You sent me an invitation." He nodded toward a stack of press releases in Mason's assistant's hands. "You must have forgotten to take me off your mailing list." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. Vanessa's hand tightened around Mason's arm. She whispered something under her breath, her eyes sharp and full of panic. Andrew could almost hear her thoughts. He's supposed to be gone. He's supposed to be nothing. He leaned closer to the microphone at the podium before Mason could stop him. "I just wanted to congratulate the happy couple," he said, his voice echoing across the marble hall. "It's beautiful to see love blossom from shared investments," the crowd murmured. His smile didn't waver. "I look forward to seeing how this partnership grows. Truly." Then he turned and left, leaving behind silence so heavy it choked the room. Outside, Emma caught up to him, breathless. "That was bold." "It wasn't bold," Andrew said, slipping into the car. "It was bait." Later that night, in his private office overlooking the city, Andrew poured himself a drink and pulled up the files Emma had compiled. Mason and Vanessa's financials were intertwined. Her inheritance, his firm, and the properties they'd acquired under their new brand. All of it depended on one fragile foundation, the trust Mason thought he controlled. But Andrew's name, hidden behind layers of old shell companies, was still embedded in its legal core. Emma watched him work, her voice low. "You're not just trying to ruin them, are you?" Andrew's eyes met hers, cold but alive. "No, Emma, I'm reminding them who they betrayed." In the following weeks, he moved silently. A single leaked memo here, a small error in a balance sheet there. His team, men who owed him favors from years ago, bought strategic shares through anonymous accounts, creating slow chaos in the firm's internal structure. Mason began losing clients without knowing why. Investors withdrew, citing instability rumors. Vanessa grew restless, her smile cracking in every photo. One night, Mason confronted her in their penthouse, the skyline burning behind the glass. "You said he was finished," he shouted. "You promised he had nothing left." Vanessa's voice trembled. "He was. I don't know how he's doing this." Mason slammed a fist against the bar. "He's playing us. That's what he's doing." Across town, Andrew sat in his study, the old letter from his father resting beside him. The words seemed to glow under the lamplight. "If they dare mock your fall, let them see how far you can rise." He thought of Mason's anger, Vanessa's fear, the cracks in their perfect facade, and he smiled. But the storm was only beginning. Days later, Emma entered his office holding a folder, her face pale. "Mr. Carter, you need to see this." Inside were documents, bank statements, trust reports, and a photograph. Vanessa and Mason weren't just lovers. They were thieves. They had transferred millions from Andrew's hidden assets during his bankruptcy. They thought the trail was erased. It wasn't. Andrew's voice dropped to a whisper. "They took my father's company money." Emma nodded. "Yes, every cent they could reach." He leaned back, eyes distant, dangerous. "Then it's time they learn what true bankruptcy feels like." The next morning, the first domino fell. A sudden audit from federal authorities, one Andrew had quietly triggered, froze Whitaker and Cole's accounts. Reporters swarmed their offices. The stock plummeted. Mason's face was on every screen, his once perfect reputation crumbling under accusations of fraud and embezzlement. That night, Andrew stood on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker as if bowing to him. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. Silence at first, then a whisper, Vanessa's voice shaking. "Andrew, please. I don't know what you're doing, but stop. You'll destroy us. He said nothing. And only the sound of his slow breathing filled the line. Please, she whispered again. I made a mistake. He smiled faintly. No, Vanessa, you made a choice. Then he hung up, setting the glass down on the table. Outside, thunder rolled again, just like the night she left him. This time, though, the storm was his to command. The morning after the financial collapse of Whitaker and Cole, the city awoke to headlines that painted Mason Miller as a fraud and Vanessa Carter Miller as a social climber who had married into scandal. Andrew read the papers alone in the quiet of his penthouse suite, one that no one knew he owned. From the floor to ceiling windows, the skyline he had built flickered under the dawn. He wasn't smiling. Not yet. Revenge to him wasn't satisfaction, it was precision. The money loss was only the first cut. Now he wanted their world to bleed from within. Across town, Mason's voice echoed through the marble of their penthouse. They froze everything. The accounts, the properties, even the trust. His tie hung loose, his eyes red. Vanessa sat by the fireplace, scrolling through her phone, her makeup smudged, trying to call people who no longer answered. The same friends who had once toasted her new marriage now avoided her name. Mason, calm down. Calm down, he shouted. You said he was finished. You said Andrew couldn't touch us. Vanessa's hand trembled as she lit a cigarette. He's just bitter. He won't keep this up. He can't. But she didn't believe it. Somewhere deep inside, she remembered the way Andrew used to sit in silence when angry, never yelling, never warning. That kind of quiet terrified her now. At that same moment, in a modest suburban home far from the chaos, Andrew's secretary Emma was arranging files when a soft knock came at the door. A courier handed her an unmarked envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy, recent, and devastating. They showed Mason with another woman, younger, laughing together in a private lounge. Emma froze. She knew this wasn't random. She drove straight to Andrew. He looked at the photographs without surprise. He's already cheating on her, he murmured. Perfect. Emma stared at him. You planned this? Andrew's eyes flicked toward her. No, but I know how to use it. That evening, Vanessa attended a charity gala alone, her first public appearance since the scandal. Cameras flashed, whispers followed her like perfume. Halfway through the event, a server approached with an envelope on a silver tray. From a guest. Ma'am? Inside, she found a single photo, Mason's hand on another woman's thigh, his wedding ring gleaming under nightclub lights. Her throat closed. Around her, polite laughter turned sharp. A journalist nearby caught her frozen expression, snapping a picture that would appear on every gossip blog the next morning. By midnight, Mason arrived home drunk, furious. You embarrassed me, crying in public like a fool. Vanessa threw the photo at him. You embarrassed yourself. Who is she? He grabbed her wrist. Don't start with me, Vanessa. You think you're innocent? You ruined everything the moment you dragged that man into our lives. Her voice cracked. You were part of it too. He shoved past her and stormed out. When the door slammed, she collapsed onto the couch, shaking. The phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Vanessa. Andrew's voice was calm, almost gentle. She froze. Andrew, why are you doing this? Doing what? You've already destroyed our company. No, he said softly. You destroyed my trust. I'm only returning the balance. Please, she whispered. You were kind once. I still am, he replied. That's why I'm warning you. Some truths are about to surface, and you'll wish you'd stayed honest. Before she could respond, the line went dead. The next day, lawyers called Mason and Vanessa to court for a mandatory deposition over the frozen assets. In the courtroom, Andrew sat quietly at the back, expression unreadable. When the judge demanded proof of Mason's financial integrity, Andrew's attorney slid a thick folder across the table. Bank statements, offshore transfers, falsified loans, all in Mason's name. The room buzzed. Mason's voice broke. This is a setup. Those were her transactions. Vanessa's jaw dropped. Mine, you liar. The judge banged the gavel. Enough. The court will investigate further. As security escorted Mason out, reporters swarmed the hall. Vanessa turned and saw Andrew watching her. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a calm that frightened her more than rage ever could. That evening, she went to her parents' home seeking sympathy, but her mother's expression was cold. "Do you know what you've done to us? Our reputation? Your father's job?" Vanessa stammered. I didn't know he'd do this." Her father's voice thundered from the kitchen. "He's cut every contract we had with his companies. We're finished." When she left, the night air felt heavy. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number. It contained a birth certificate, her eldest child's. Under father, the name wasn't Andrew Carter. It wasn't Mason Miller either. It was someone else entirely. Her vision blurred. Andrew's message followed a moment later. "Truth always finds its owner." Across town, Andrew sat in his study, the faint hum of the city outside. The letter from his father lay open beside a glass of whiskey. He traced the words again. "If they mock your fall, let them see how far you can rise." He had exposed their lies, crushed their wealth, and now their marriage was burning from the inside out. But beneath the satisfaction, a deeper wound lingered. Years of love, trust, and fatherhood turned to ash. Emma entered quietly, her voice soft. "You've won, Andrew." He looked out the window. "No, Emma, I've only started." Lightning flared across the skyline, painting his reflection against the glass. The city that once pitied him was now his chessboard, and every piece, Vanessa, Mason, even their children, was exactly where he wanted them. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled, every camera pointed toward the marble steps where the story of betrayal, fraud, and revenge was about to reach the nation's headlines. Andrew Carter arrived late, not out of arrogance, but control. He stepped out of a black Rolls-Royce, dressed in a charcoal suit that gleamed under the morning light. The crowd murmured. Only months ago, they'd seen him as a bankrupt husband left behind by his wife and his best friend. Now he looked every inch the man in command of his destiny. Inside, Mason Miller sat at the defense table, his once polished face worn in gray, a shadow of the proud man who once mocked Andrew's fall. Beside him sat Vanessa, eyes hollow, clutching her pearls like they could protect her from the truth about to crash over her life. She'd barely slept since the day the birth certificate arrived. Her lies had names now, children who might not belong to the men she once used. The courtroom smelled of tension, paper, and fear. When Andrew entered, the sound of his footsteps echoed like verdicts. Even the judge looked up. The clerk announced, "Case 17B, Carter Holdings versus Whitaker and Cole Financial Group, Mason Miller and Vanessa Carter Miller, defendants." Vanessa's lips parted slightly. Carter Holdings. She whispered it under her breath like a curse. Mason turned, confused. "What does that mean?" Andrew sat beside his lawyer, calm, collected, his expression unreadable. The attorney leaned forward and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to clarify that Mr. Carter is the sole owner of Carter Holdings, which, through its subsidiaries, controls a majority stake in Whitaker and Cole Financial Group." The room erupted. Reporters gasped. Mason's jaw dropped. "That's impossible," Andrew's attorney smiled. "Not impossible, simply undisclosed." The judge raised a brow. "You mean to tell this court that Mr. Carter owns the company currently suing the defendants?" "Yes, Your Honor. He is both the founder and the largest investor, operating under corporate proxies established before his bankruptcy was declared. A bankruptcy which was, in fact, a strategic test of fiduciary loyalty." Mason leapt to his feet. "He's lying. He's trying to frame me." Andrew finally spoke, his voice steady and precise. "You framed yourself when you stole what wasn't yours." The judge called for order as flashes erupted from the media gallery. Mason's attorney scrambled, flipping through documents, sweat beading on his temple. "Your Honor, this is an ambush." The judge adjusted his glasses. "It's an awakening." Vanessa's face drained of color. "Andrew, why didn't you tell me?" He turned his eyes to her, the calm in them sharper than rage. "You didn't ask." The prosecution presented evidence. Bank transfers, falsified ledgers, stolen assets, all signed under Mason's name, many with Vanessa's authorization. The jury watched the footage of her, laughing beside Mason at charity events, praising the firm's transparency. Every smile was now a dagger turned inward. During cross-examination, Mason's lawyer tried to paint Andrew as vindictive. So you're saying you deliberately hid your wealth to test people's loyalty? Andrew nodded once. That's correct. Even your wife's? Especially my wife's. The courtroom fell silent. Vanessa flinched, her eyes shining with tears. You don't understand, she whispered. I loved you. No, he said softly. You loved the man you thought had nothing left to give. And when he had nothing, you left. That's not love, it's business. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the stenographer paused before catching up. Outside, news vans broadcast the case live. Commentators called it the divorce that shook Wall Street. Social media buzzed, Kunas, the hidden billionaire, your betrayal trial, as Carter returns. By the third day of trial, Mason's empire was ashes. The court ruled that all company assets be seized pending investigation. Investors fled. His partners resigned. But Andrew wasn't done. During a recess, Emma found him standing by the courthouse balcony, staring at the city. You could end it now, she said gently. They've lost everything. He shook his head. Not yet. They still have their dignity. Down the hall, Vanessa cornered him in private. Andrew, please, she said, her voice breaking. If not for me, for the children. He looked at her with quiet intensity. The children you claimed were mine? She froze. Andrew, don't, he said firmly. I already know. I paid for their schools, their clothes, their lives. Children fathered by the men you thought would give you more than I could. You don't get to use them as a shield now. Her tears came fast, mascara streaking her face. You've become cruel. He leaned close enough that only she could hear. No, Vanessa, I've become you. When court reconvened, Mason's final defense crumbled. A whistleblower, an accountant Andrew had quietly protected years ago, testified about how Mason had manipulated the firm's accounts, embezzling funds through offshore shells. Every lie they had built came crashing down, one ledger at a time. By verdict day, the courtroom was a theater of ruin. The judge's ruling was clear. Full forfeiture of Mason and Vanessa's assets to Carter Holdings, immediate dissolution of Whitaker and Cole, and civil penalties for financial misconduct. Mason sat frozen, his hands shaking. Vanessa wept silently beside him. Andrew stood. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply gathered his papers and turned to leave. As he walked past, Mason hissed, You destroyed us. Andrew stopped. No, Mason, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure the world watched. Outside, flashes of cameras followed him down the steps. Emma met him by the car, holding an umbrella. You won, she said quietly. He glanced back at the courthouse. No, Emma, justice won. But deep inside, as the rain began to fall again, he knew justice wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was the hollowness of victory, the echo left when love turns to vengeance, and vengeance to silence. He had crushed them completely, but the sound of their downfall didn't fill the void she'd left behind. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, Vanessa stood at the courthouse doors, staring at him through the rain, her once perfect life now a puddle beneath his wheels. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. As if closing a chapter the world would never forget. Night had settled over Stonebridge City with a coldness that cut through steel. The storm clouds gathered low, the streets glistening under flickering streetlights. Andrew Carter's name was everywhere, on news tickers, financial blogs, and social feeds. The billionaire who faked his bankruptcy to test his wife and best friend. He had become a symbol of poetic justice. But victory, he knew, always came with shadows. In a corner of the city, Mason Miller's life was dissolving into chaos. His accounts were frozen, his house foreclosed, and his reputation blacklisted from every firm that once fought for his handshake. He sat in a cheap motel room, staring at empty bottles and a gun on the nightstand. His reflection in the mirror looked nothing like the man who once grinned beside Vanessa in magazine spreads. Sweat matted his hair. His phone buzzed again. Blocked number. When he answered, a voice whispered, "You thought you could play with the wrong man's wife and walk away?" Then the line went dead. Mason swallowed hard, recognizing the tone. Someone Andrew once did business with in the darker corners of finance. He suddenly realized that Andrew's reach went beyond the boardroom. Panic clawed at his chest. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat alone in her parents' old house, one they'd lost, but now rented in shame. The marble floors were gone, replaced with linoleum. The glittering dresses, the dinners, the friends, gone. She watched an old video on her phone, her and Andrew laughing in their backyard, their young son chasing bubbles in the sunlight. The memory hit like a blade. Her tears came fast, choking. When her phone rang, she answered instantly, hoping it was him. Andrew? Silence. Then a man's voice she didn't recognize. You need to tell your ex-husband to stop digging into our accounts, or you'll both regret it. The call ended before she could respond. Her hands shook. For the first time since everything fell apart, fear replaced guilt. Someone else had entered this war, someone who didn't care about love or betrayal, only money and power. Across town, in the dim glow of his office, Andrew reviewed the files Emma had uncovered. Hidden transactions connected to Mason's firm led to offshore accounts tied to organized crime. Mason and Vanessa hadn't just stolen from him, they had laundered money for dangerous people. He exhaled slowly. They brought wolves into the house, he murmured. Emma looked uneasy. Andrew, maybe it's time to stop. You've won. They're ruined. But these people, you can't control them. He looked up, his expression unreadable. If they come for me, they'll learn I'm not the same man they destroyed. She stepped closer. I'm not worried about them hurting your business. I'm worried about them hurting you. Andrew smiled faintly, though his eyes were tired. Don't worry, Emma. I've survived worse storms. But storms have a way of striking when pride blinds the sky. That night, after leaving his office, Andrew took the long way home through the industrial district. Rain began to fall, heavy, rhythmic, relentless. He barely noticed the black SUV that had been trailing him since he left downtown. When he stopped at a red light, the SUV swerved, blocking his lane. Another car boxed him in from behind. Before he could react, 4 masked men stepped out. The first blow shattered his windshield. The second broke the side window. They dragged him out into the rain, fists pounding against ribs, boots crushing against asphalt. He fought back, but there were too many. The sound of thunder drowned out his groans. One of the men leaned close, his breath hot with malice. You should have stayed broke, Carter. A pipe slammed against Andrew's side. His vision blurred. He felt warm blood mixed with cold rain. Somewhere in the distance, tires screeched and a horn blared. A car approaching. The attackers fled into the shadows, their footsteps splashing through puddles. A woman's voice broke through the chaos. Oh my God! He blinked, barely conscious. Through the haze, he saw a young woman kneel beside him, her blonde hair soaked, her paramedic's jacket catching flashes of lightning. Her hands trembled as she checked his pulse. Stay with me, sir. You're going to be okay. He tried to speak, but pain silenced him. She looked around, frantic, realizing the nearest hospital was miles away. She lifted his head onto her lap and whispered, I'm a nurse. I can help you. Please don't close your eyes. He passed out to the sound of her voice. When Andrew woke hours later, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled his lungs. He wasn't in a hospital room. This was a small apartment. The nurse, her hair tied back, sat beside the bed watching him. You're awake, she said softly. I'm Claire Dalton. You were attacked. I brought you here. The hospital would have called the press. He tried to sit up, wincing. Why would you help me? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Because my father used to work for your company. When everyone said you went bankrupt, he told me you were a good man. He said you once paid his medical bills anonymously after his accident. Andrew's brow furrowed. Your father? David Dalton, she said. He passed last year. He fell silent, emotion flickering behind his calm. He remembered David, an engineer who'd lost both legs in a construction accident. Andrew had covered the hospital expenses quietly, never seeking credit. Claire continued, her eyes warm but steady. When I saw you lying there, bleeding in the rain, I couldn't leave you. You looked like someone who'd been fighting alone too long. He managed a faint smile. You have no idea. Over the next days, Claire nursed him back to health. She cooked, changed his bandages, and filled the silence with gentle stories. She never asked about his wealth, his revenge, or his past. She simply treated him like a man, not a scandal, not a billionaire, not a victim. Sometimes at night, Andrew would wake from nightmares. Vanessa's betrayal, Mason's laughter, the echo of his father's words, and find Claire sitting nearby, reading quietly. Her presence steadied him. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Peace. But peace never lasted long in Andrew's world. One evening, as rain tapped softly on the windows, Emma called in panic. "Andrew, I traced the attackers. They were hired by someone named Victor Hale. He's the investor Mason borrowed from before the collapse. He wants his money back." Andrew's voice hardened. "Then I'll give him what he wants. Just not the way he expects." Claire looked at him from across the room, worry shadowing her eyes. "Who's Victor Hale?" He met her gaze. "The man who thinks he can finish what my wife and best friend started." He stood, still bruised, still limping, but with the fire of a man reborn. "But this time, I'm not fighting alone." And as thunder rolled once more over the city, Andrew Carter prepared for the final phase of his war, the one that would end not just his enemies, but the darkness that had followed him since the night his wife walked away. Lightning cracked across the skyline as Andrew Carter stepped out of the car, the wind whipping his coat behind him. The rooftop of Hale Tower stretched above the clouds, a kingdom of glass and greed. The man waiting for him near the helipad wasn't just another rival. He was the puppeteer behind the strings of betrayal. Victor Hale, the financier who had once backed Mason's empire and quietly orchestrated the violence meant to silence Andrew forever. "Carter," Victor greeted, his smile cold and calculated. "You survived." Andrew adjusted his cufflinks, his calm unnerving. "You hired amateurs." Victor's laugh echoed against the metal and rain. "You should have stayed down. The story's over. You've already destroyed your wife and her lover. Why drag me into it?" "Because you were always part of it," Andrew replied, stepping closer. "You funded Mason's theft. You buried my company's accounts. You turned my bankruptcy into your playground." Victor's smirk deepened. "Business, my friend. You faked poverty. I exploited it. Don't play moral now." Andrew stopped a few feet away, the city lights shimmering behind him like a crown. "There's one difference, Hale. I don't destroy people who haven't earned it." Victor's bodyguards shifted, hands inching toward their weapons. But before they could draw, the elevator doors slid open. Emma and two federal agents stepped out, badges flashing in the rain. Victor's confidence cracked. "What the hell is this?" Andrew's voice was calm, surgical. "You think I came here alone? I've been recording you since the moment you called my wife's killer your problem solver. Every transaction, every shell account, every hit you ordered, it's all in federal custody now." The agents moved fast, disarming Victor's men. One officer snapped cuffs around Hale's wrists as Andrew watched, his face unreadable. "You can't win this," Victor snarled. "You're as dirty as I am. You hid billions offshore." Andrew stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. "The difference, Victor, is that I hid mine to test people. You hid yours to destroy them. That's why you'll rot, and I'll rebuild." Victor's glare faltered as the agents dragged him toward the elevator. His voice echoed back, venomous. "You'll regret this, Carter. You always do." The storm swallowed his words. For a long time, Andrew stood there, rain soaking through his hair, thunder rolling across the city he had once built and lost. Emma approached, her voice steady. "It's over, Andrew. He's done." He nodded slowly. "No, it's finally clean." She hesitated. "What about Vanessa and Mason?" "They'll face their sentences," he said quietly. "Their punishment isn't prison, it's irrelevance. I've already won." A soft voice broke the silence. "And what about you?" He turned. Claire stood at the edge of the rooftop, holding an umbrella, her face pale from worry. She'd come despite his warnings to stay away. "You're bleeding again," she said, eyes searching his. He looked down. Blood seeped through the reopened wound on his shoulder. He laughed softly. "It's nothing, just old damage trying to heal." She stepped closer and pressed a hand over the wound to stop the bleeding. "That's the problem," she whispered. "You don't know when to stop fighting." He studied her for a long moment. "It's the only thing that ever kept me alive." Claire shook her head, tears glinting in the rain. "No, Andrew. What kept you alive was hope. You just forgot what it looked like. The wind stilled for a heartbeat. Her words sank deeper than any wound. For the first time in years, Andrew saw the path he'd been walking, one paved with victories that left him emptier with every step. Revenge had given him justice, but stolen his peace. He exhaled slowly. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not, she said softly, but you deserve a second chance. He looked out over Stonebridge City, the skyline gleaming like redemption after ruin. Below him, the world was already moving on, headlines shifting from scandal to recovery, from vengeance to rebirth. In the weeks that followed, the court sentenced Mason to 12 years for fraud. Vanessa, exposed for perjury and laundering, was ordered to pay restitution to the families whose savings she had destroyed. Her face, once adored in magazines, vanished from every screen. She lived quietly, anonymously, far from the city she once ruled. Andrew sold off his holdings piece by piece, dissolving Carter Holdings into charitable trusts under Emma's guidance. He moved into a smaller home on the outskirts of the city, the same neighborhood where Claire lived. Some mornings she found him sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, reading letters from his late father. He no longer spoke of revenge. Instead, he talked about rebuilding hospitals, funding scholarships, and hiring people who had been crushed by the same greed he once fought. Months later, under a soft spring sky, Andrew and Claire stood in a quiet garden behind a small chapel. There were no cameras, no board members, no grand vows. Only two people who had both saved each other in different ways. He looked at her, eyes steady. You brought me back to life, Claire. She smiled. No, Andrew. You just finally let yourself live. They married that afternoon with Emma and a few old friends as witnesses. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Andrew slipped his father's letter into the pocket of his suit. He had read it so many times he could recite it by heart. But tonight, the final line felt new. Rebuild, not to punish, but to remind. He looked at his new wife and whispered, I finally understand what he meant. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. Then maybe it's time to stop surviving and start belonging. The wind carried her words across the garden, and for once, Andrew felt no ghosts in them. Far away in a forgotten cell, Mason stared at a photo of Vanessa and muttered, He won. In another city, Vanessa stood before a store window, watching children laugh, her reflection older, humbler, broken. And somewhere above them all, Andrew Carter's story, once one of ruin, betrayal, and vengeance, became something else entirely, a legend of how power without mercy destroys and how mercy after destruction rebuilds. The storm was finally over. But in its silence, the man who went bankrupt after his wife left him to marry his best friend, and whose secretary found an old letter that changed everything, had found what none of them ever could: peace. Betrayal may break a man, but it also reveals what was never real. Andrew's story teaches that true strength doesn't come from wealth or revenge. It comes from patience, restraint, and the courage to rise without becoming the monsters who tried to destroy you. In the end, revenge fades, but integrity outlives every lie. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover who truly deserves to stand beside you when you rebuild. If this story gripped your heart and reminded you that karma always finds its way home, don't just scroll. Like, subscribe, and share this video so more people can witness stories where betrayal meets justice and love rises from the ashes. Stay tuned for the next episode on Revenge with Walex, where truth, heartbreak, and redemption collide in ways you'll never forget.